I think it's a good topic. It's the media and the news and how the trust in the media and the news has changed. And I've got somebody that's actually jumped into that arena, and someone who is an attorney, a history buff, but they're both business owners and they're both really smart guys. And with that being said, here they come up in the feed with me. And then I got something I'm going to read. What's up, Eric Buchanan, Brandon Lewis?
Hey, Glenn, how are you? Hey, Brandon.
All right. Glad to be here. Good to see you.
I want to do this real quick, guys. I want to read y'all something. There's 2 articles, and I sent them to you both. But unfortunately, you guys have real jobs and can't just read stuff all day that I send y'all. There's this one an article out of Psychology Today, and it's called The Original Truth Decay. It's a report. But it has 4 things, and maybe this is a good place to jumpstart the conversation. The Original Truth Decay report in 2018 identified 4 interconnected trends. 1, increasing disagreement about facts and analytical interpretations of facts and data, which I think we see now. Both Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives will throw, we're the party of science. And then when somebody disagrees with something, they go, why don't you believe in science? 2, a blurring between opinion and fact. That I love sites that tell me up front, listen, we're going to take a story and we're going to approach it from a liberal perspective or a conservative perspective, because then I know what I get. It's the ones that we're going to talk a little bit about that had this, they call legacy, or the traditional media that say, we're just going to present the news. And it's not the news. 3rd was an increase in the relative volume of opinion and personal experience over fact. In other words, the anecdotal or the one-off now is supposed to represent everything. And then 4, the declining trust in formally respected sources of factual information. Does all that sound familiar to you guys? Does that not sound like the world we're living in?
Absolutely.
Absolutely to me too.
All right, well, good. Now that I've said that, and I kind of did a brief intro.
Are we done, Clint? You covered it.
We're guys, thanks for your time. Brandon, you can get to your 8-year-old early. Eric, you can go. Way to place your logo right there for the big move, Brandon. I like it. You're a marketing genius, sir. Well, let's do this. Let's take a few seconds before I start asking questions and letting you guys tell your stories or bring up some topics. Tell people, Brandon, what you do and why you're on this, because I brought you on this specifically because you did dive into this world.
Well, briefly, I'm similar to both of you gentlemen. I have a business background. I owned a construction company. I did work in politics for Senator Corker, Congressman Desjardins, wrote the book, How to Raise Money for Political Office, worked for a lot of state and local offices, holders, but started a construction business in 2008, sold it in 2013, and then I coach hundreds of painting contractors in 6 different English-speaking countries. And so, I started the Tennessee Conservative because we do not have a local conservative media outlet in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and we're losing the fight in public opinion because hardly any of the none of the outlets that we have currently, aside from the Chattanoogan, which just shoots it straight down the middle and reports facts only. We don't have any conservative representation, so that's why I started this publication specifically so we could cover some of the mundane things that aren't very sexy, but that impact our lives, like the school board, county commission, city council, and the state legislature.
Eric, tell everybody what you do.
So I am a disability insurance attorney. I help people who have disability policies who have been told by an insurance company that they don't qualify. And I have a national practice helping people all over the United States doing that. The reason I like coming to these conversations and being on with you, Clint, doing these of, by, and for the people videos is I'm a veteran. I went to military school, served 5 years in the Navy. Then I went to law school. I consider myself to be somewhat of a constitutional scholar. I was also a history major, and I read a crap ton of stuff on politics. I read a crap ton of stuff on history. It's what I like to do when I'm not helping my clients is talk about politics, and I am, by God, a patriot. There is something, it is God, family, and country to me in a way that has just gotten to my core, and right now what's happening to our country scares the crud out of me. That I have some real concerns about our country and where we're going as a nation, and what I was taught about America and what I was taught about our country. I forgot to mention I'm also an Eagle Scout and on the board of the Cherokee Area Council here in Chattanooga, and I love helping the Boy Scouts. Those are my fundamental core values. America needs to be protected, and sometimes we can't just sit back and just say the Pledge of Allegiance and sing the national anthem and then hope everything's gonna be okay. And it's even worse right now when we're told those things are not okay to do anymore, and that's wrong. That is not what we're supposed to be doing in our country.
Amen, Brother Buchanan.
Well, and I'll say this. I've had so many conversations with Eric, and I've known Eric for so long, that part of being a patriot is also holding your country accountable for the things we do wrong and right. And sometimes revisionist history goes both ways. It's not like we can't take out the parts of history we don't like. We have to confront those and be honest about them. It also doesn't mean you're defined by your history only. And so I think those fine lines in there is why I love having these conversations, because it's not either or. It's not either we're all bad and we're no good, or we're all good and we never did anything bad. That's why I like these conversations. But specifically today around the media, I'm almost 53 years old. And I remember growing up watching newscast and listening to mom and dad.
By the way, you get better looking every day, Clint.
Oh,
so
I do.
Quit bragging. I mean, that's part of the fun of doing this, is the eye candy of you being there, so everybody can.
You just like it because people can come on, and I bring that group with us. The
modeling at 90. I can see it.
There's no chance I lived at 90. If you know what, my check engine light's been on for about 15 years, so there's no way I lived at 90. But I'll say this: it's when I grew up. And I think a lot of people would agree. We had the Walter Cronkites. We had the hard journalism where they asked the questions and they told you what was going on. And then you kind of picked out how you filtered it. I like that, or I don't like that. That doesn't seem right. That does seame right. The newspaper, same way. And Eric, I know you had a good David Israel.
I'm reading the comments.
Dadgummit. David, you just stay on. Don't say anything else. But the thing is is now it seems like we have all these little opinions. I wrote something down, and then Brandon, I think you have some examples. We hear things now like the media will say, we're not going to talk about a story because it's unsubstantiated, unverified, but that usually only goes one way.
Yeah.
Right. We see the media throw out words like this is brave or it's daring, but it usually only goes one way. And I read something today and I put it down in here. And I wish I could find it, because the subtle headlines, the way you put a headline out there means so much. In other words, if me and you, Brandon, were talking and you said something I thought was racist, if I post the headline and I say Clint Powell gets upset over racist comment made by Brandon Lewis, and people share it without reading the article, well, yeah. That's way different than just saying Clint gets upset over comments made by Brandon Lewis. Let people read both sides of it, and they figure out for themselves if that seems racist or not. Does that make sense?
What they do is they'll put everyone's opinion about what is said, and then in the second to last paragraph, they will put the quote of the person who actually said it. And 85% of people are never going to read that far down the article. They're going to look at the image, they're going to read the headline, they're going to skim the first part of it, and even though the substance of the article is down at the very last paragraph, most people don't know that by the time they consume the story or it's shared.
And Eric, and you brought it up, and then I want to get some of your stories, because you've been knee deep in this, Brandon, about how it used to be the media put stuff out, and I wrote this down. We were observers, right? We were the consumers. We watched the news. We read the news. Mm-hmm. Now we're participants. I can share the news like this with my 15 or 20 friends multiplied by millions of people. So actually now we are participants in the news and sharing it so fast, whether it's true or not. I don't think it's ever been like that.
I agree. I get more news than I care to admit from a handful of trusted friends in my social media feed, because it's efficient, meaning you don't have to, if you know that your friend holds X, Y, or Z opinion, or if they're an expert in automotive or sports or camping or whatever it is, you follow them in their feed. And when they present an opinion, it's the same reason that people hire a contractor or a disability attorney by referral, because we don't want to think real hard about our decisions. And so we go to what we think are safe sources, and we get our information from there. So you're correct. I mean, a lot of people are now, willing or unwilling participants in news media, more in the echo chambers, variety than in the origination variety.
Well, and I'll let Eric talk about this a little bit later, but what I'll do is you'll post a headline I don't like, Brandon, and I'll post a headline that I do like. And neither one of us may have read the article, but it's the tennis match of headlines.
Yes.
So tell me a couple of the stories and a couple of the stats, because I know we're going to be crushed for time, and I want to make sure we get what you did and what you've experienced out there. And then Eric and I will kind of ask questions based off that.
Well, this is kind of interesting. So recently, they did a study, and this is just case in point. Now, he's a little unlockable to a lot of the country, but very much lockable to the rest. Study found, we've heard this in a variety of sources, that Trump received, over a span of time here in recent, I think it's just in the month of October, that he received 839 minutes of coverage, with a whopping 92.4% of them being negative, while only 269 total minutes of airtime were devoted to Biden. Only 34% of those were considered negative. And you see that in headlines, you see that in media coverage all over the place. And it's one side, one opinion, one politician will receive like 90+% negative coverage. And even on issues related to the economy. Now, you may not like his personality, but they really have an axe to grind. They have a direction they want to go in. And a lot of that has to do, in my opinion, with this little number. Only 7% of journalists identify as Republican, and 97% of journalists' political contributions go to Democrats. And so if you think you're going to get unbiased news coverage from people that have a political bent that leans so heavily from traditional mainstream media outlets like ours in town, the Times Free Press, I think that you really need to think more logically and rationally, because people tend to tell you, people tend to report how they actually feel personally, and that's why you got to be careful where you get your news.
I wonder, I don't know, when you say that, they do tend to report that now. But again, I go back to how I was raised. I don't know if Walter Cronkite always did that. Maybe he did sometimes. And I was young, and everything's better when you're looking back 30 or 40 years. It's always seemed to be sweeter in memory.
Those numbers have changed, especially it used to be, I think, back in the 70s and 80s, the split was like 25-35. People that actually, like, maybe it's 27% identified as Republican, 35% identified as Democrats. Now they don't identify. Like, if you look at the study, 7% identify as Republican. It's like 50-something% identify as independents, and 25% identify as Democrats. And what you probably come to realize is that people just say they're independents when in fact they're liberal Democrats.
Well, I think also, and Eric, I don't know how you feel about this, but I think it's true even in reporting. I don't think it's as true as in general population, but I would bet there's a group of people that are going to say they're independent that probably do like Trump. They're just not going to say it out loud. They're going to work one way and do another. Because I think if I'm in the media, if I'm a celebrity right now and I come out and I endorse or say anything good about Trump or conservatives, let's take Trump out of it, I'm pretty much going to be, in the grinder of my own party.
Yeah, a lot of what's going on is it's not just that the media has these large percentages of liberals that are actually working in the media, but the leaders in the media. We've seen the recent stories in the last few days that somebody got access to some of the internal meetings at CNN, and that the head of CNN, was literally telling his staff, our job is to take down the president. Our job is to make sure that Biden wins the next election. We are not a neutral news source. We actually have a political agenda. He was essentially saying those things exactly. And I kind of feel like that's shocking, right? we like, that's a big surprise. Well, we knew CNN was doing that. But what is kind of shocking is that they're flat out admitting it. And going back to what you said about, there was Walter Cronkite. There was, when we were
Peter Jennings,
when we were growing up, there was, I'm old enough, so are you, Clint, that we had black and white TVs with antennas at home, and I didn't know Spock was green until I was about 17 years old, and we got our first color TV, and we had 3 channels plus maybe PBS if you could get it tuned in right, and so we didn't have a lot of different news sources. We had the newspaper, we had magazines that would come out once or twice a month where they'd have more thoughtful articles. But I think the big difference was they made at least a showing of trying to be neutral. They weren't always, but they at least gave the impression they were trying to be. Now I think it's become so biased in a lot of the mainstream media. The emperor's not wearing any clothes anymore. It's clear what they're doing. That it is totally biased. And it's just that younger people been raised watching that, don't think it's anything special or different, that they don't realize that that's unusual. But at the same time, I would say that it's not the first time that this has happened. We may have had a golden age growing up when we had sort of trustworthy 3 networks. Because in the history of journalism in the United States, there's the whole yellow journalism phase, that when basically they started the Spanish-American War to sell more newspapers. That the Maine blew up in Havana, maybe because of some kind of malfunction, but apparently it was a Spanish terrorist bomb is what they sold. And then the idea of William Randolph Hearst running his newspaper empire would typically say stuff like, what's going to sell the most newspapers? What's going to get me the chance to make the most money? Go write those stories. No, by the way, if there's no story there, go make one up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we've had that history. And then the other history that is, it's sometimes shocking because we grew up thinking the news was supposed to be neutral. Think of how many newspapers are named The Democrat. Look that up on the internet sometime. And it's dozens and dozens. The oldest one, I went and looked at this, the 20th oldest newspaper in the United States, the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, goes back to 1819, probably the first big newspaper west of the Mississippi, or one of the big ones, and it's still around today. The Tallahassee Democrat, there's just tons of those papers, and they were created because they're pro-Democrat. There's some papers, the 17th oldest newspaper in the United States is the Press Republican, and it was founded in 1811, about the time we really got into a 2-party system. So it's not unusual for news sources to be biased. Maybe you could argue they used to be a little more honest about it. If you bought the paper saying that this is the paper called The Republican, that might be the paper with the conservative or Republican-leaning stories in it.
Well, and two, I think we deemed them, they had so much power, newspapers and even TV, they had so much power in developing culture and assigning leadership, when they first started off, because what's the old quote? You don't start an argument with somebody that buys ink by the barrel, because they could form opinions about people. So I know it's not new, but something has happened now where it's almost like we spend as much time discrediting what Brandon will post something, and instead of consuming what we say or what we read, we try to discredit the source. Now it's all about discrediting where people get their news. So we don't talk about the topics anymore. We don't talk about topics. We talk about, where'd you get that from? Well, you know what they did. They also posted this 5 years ago. And you've been in the political world, Brandon. You've helped people run campaigns. Have you seen this firsthand?
Well, it goes to number 4, what you mentioned previously, is the decline in trust in established media outlets. I'll give you a case in point. I worked for Scott Desjardins, and he had a very messy divorce like 20 years ago. And the Times Free Press ran, I think it was like, if I remember, I may be misquoting this, it was like 32 negative articles leading up to the primary, 45 days in a span. So like every day there's a story about a new angle. They're trotting off into the hills and the hollers to interview people, whoever he might have happened to drink a beer with back in 1991. And this is news, right? This is news. And this is running for like 32 consecutive, it's not consecutive, but it's a 45-day period. And, this guy's completely unbiased. The TFP doesn't have an axe to grind. As soon as the campaign's over, the reporter who runs all this immediately leaves to go work for the only Democrat congressman in Memphis as his communications director. Now, you'll never see that organization write an apology or admit that anything was crazy or wrong. They just continue to move with it. And, echoing what Eric said, you look back into the days of the founding of our country, especially, after Washington was president and Adams and Jefferson were going at it. The press was very partisan. I mean, your paper was either X or it was Y. And so we did have, I think, a period of time where journalists were considered, especially in the broadcast world, where they had to communicate with the entire country and make them happy or lose money.
Mhm.
If I had to guess, that's probably the reason they were nonpartisan for a period of time, because they had to communicate with the entire country and not, for lack of a better word, piss a bunch of people off or half the country off. And so they had to be neutral because that's where their money was. Now you've got people, if you're liberal, go listen to CNN and NBC and CBS and ABC and everybody else. If you're conservative, go to Fox or OAN or NTV
The Daily
or
Wire.
wherever you want, a National Review. And so
Yeah.
you could pick and choose where you want your news. Back when the days of early broadcast, you couldn't do that.
I think what frustrates me and most consumers, again, I grew up as an observer. Now it's almost, I can share and I can have this kind of platform. So we're contributing now too, is when you tell me you're not biased. That's, and when they're held up by certain people that believe in that message that they're delivering so much that they go, look at them, they're not biased. They're just delivering the news. I'm okay if you put something out there from CNN and you say, I like this, as long as you don't try to tell me that is the news in its totality. That is the full story and the full perspective of it. When you gaslight me or try to gaslight the nation saying this is the news, I just wish you would go doing what the Daily Wire does or what the Young Turks. I listen to the Young Turks sometimes. I grit my teeth. I hold on like this. Have either one of y'all ever listened to the Young Turks?
No.
Save yourself the brain cells. But I try to, because they are so opposite of what I believe on a lot of things. But I think it's important because I'm scared of getting trapped into that echo chamber that you both know that we can fall into. And then I wake up one day and I don't know anything but what I already knew 5 years ago.
So, Clint, this might be a good chance for me to make my once a episode commercial.
I swear to
Braver
goodness
Angels. Got to
gracious.
work it in. So, I am the Tennessee co-chair for an organization called Braver Angels, and it's made up of people who are trying to find that political common ground and political empathy. We do not try to change people's minds. If you're a Democrat, we're not going to make you think like a Republican. If you're a Republican, we're not going to make you think like a Democrat. What we are trying to strive to do is to get Democrats and Republicans to keep talking to each other. Remember that we're all Americans. And at the end of the day, politics should not be so divisive and polarizing. We might disagree on policy, and we can, strongly disagree on policy, but we're all Americans, and we should be able to trust the vote, trust the ballot box, and then trust whichever leaders that we choose. And Americans should get along. So that organization is doing that kind of stuff. And part of the benefit goes to what you were saying, Clint, is that we engage in things like, we call them red blue workshops, where we'll have people that are conservatives talking to each other while the liberals watch, and we have the liberals talking to each other while the conservatives watch, and then we'll have some breakout sessions where they talk to each other. And if you're not regularly engaging in those kind of conversations, whichever side you're on, if you're not reaching out to the other side, you're missing a whole different opportunity to understand what other news feeds are feeding people, what their understanding is. What do Democrats today really believe about what's going on? Where are they getting their information from? What do they believe to be true? And for the rare people that are still somewhere in the middle, where are they getting their information from? And it's extremely important to have those conversations and meet other people on the other side, talk to them, and find a way to have a polite, civil conversation. And one of the first things you're going to recognize, if anybody's been paying attention lately, is we can't talk about politics amongst each other because we can't agree on the damn facts. The understanding of the facts in America is so divergent right now. If you get your news from CNN and MSNBC, you are in an entirely different planet than if you get your news from Newsmax or OAN. If you get it from Fox News, well, they've even been criticized lately. They're not as conservative as they used to be. It's so hard to get an accurate picture. Where do you get the actual news from? And sometimes you have to go onto the internet and find the local newspaper in Cheyenne, Wyoming, that actually covered the story on the ground to find somebody who reported the facts.
But Brandon, haven't you found? I mean, and I know you're getting into this world even deeper and deeper. But I mean, people will pull the facts out of a story that represents what they want it to believe, and then that's what it's confirmation bias, right? We go out and we try to find something that confirms what I believe because I want to be right.
Yeah, it's true, and I guess there's two there's a probably a challenge for people that are in conservative media at all. And here's where it would be. You'd love to just deliver the facts, right? But the facts are down the middle, right? Exclusively, like you just report both sides equally and both points are equally valid. The issue is for conservatives right now, there's like a 10,000 man army over here. And there's like a 500 man army over here in the media on the conservative side. And if you don't push against the narrative over there, and if you just go down the middle, then the ball is always slightly over the 50-yard line in every play, and the other team gets to make touchdowns, with impunity. And so that's one issue that you have with trying to do it right down the middle, because when bad ideas surface, you really have to attack them pretty quickly if you think they're going to be harmful for the citizens or the taxpayers in your area, because you can't just present the facts on both sides, because everybody's presenting the same set of facts except for that one lone conservative outlet. So it presents a challenge if you're trying to affect an outcome.
Is there a second part? As you said, there was two things, two challenges. I just want to make sure I'm not stepping over you.
Well, I guess it's the making sure that you got two choices.
Oh, okay.
You can do it down the middle, or you can do it from the right. But the issue is there's so little coming from the right that doing it down the middle is not very helpful anymore. And I think that, and also you've got to pick an audience, right? And you have to tailor what you do around your audience. And there's not much of an audience for down the middle anymore.
That's our fault. That's what I've written down. There's a very big
audience for the left, and there's a very big audience for the right. There's a big audience for subculture. There's a big audience for specialty issues. But what Buchanan's doing with the Braver Angels project is unique and very very rare, I would say, these days.
I agree. And I will say this real quick. I'm writing down two things. One, listening to you both go back or talk about this, what we expect from our media, and I always say this in all these conversations, I think it always comes back to us. It's our responsibility. We, the people, there's more of us than there are of them. And marketing works. The only way marketing doesn't work is when you say, okay, I'm not going to buy that product anymore because I'm tired of how it doesn't do bull crap. Colgate's not the best for my teeth. I'm going to try Crest. Whenever you get tired of something, you go try something else. Well, marketing works. And with politics, that's what it is. It's propaganda and it's marketing. What we expect from our news sources, and you nailed it, Brandon, is way different than I think what it used to be. If there was ever a time, if we actually expected down the middle, that's gone. We don't reward that with clicks anymore. We don't reward headlines much anymore with just facts. We reward the headline, like you said, which team am I on? I'll click on that one the most. So it's almost our habit of, yeah, I'm right. I'm going to click, I'm going to read, I'm going to share, I'm going to click them. That's where they get their money from. They don't put it in print anymore. They get their money from the clicks. And the last thing I wrote down, it was the headlines. We talked a little bit about it. But I don't know if we reflect the way headlines are written as we the people now, or if the headlines reflect what we want. But if you look at a lot of headlines now will label stuff. Headlines will label things racist. Headlines will label things phobic. Headlines will label things unconstitutional, unpatriotic. These headlines now are name calling. And that to me is, I don't know if we can stop that anymore because we're clicking on it. That's the disappointing thing. As I started looking into this, I went over headlines this morning, and how many headlines were just telling me what was already in the article by labeling it. And then I look around and guess what we're all doing? We're labeling people.
Well, I mean, what is it that Ogilvy said? Said when you write a headline, you've spent 80% of your advertising budget. Now, he was in print, but
that's true.
Most of the news feeds now, I mean, in social media outlets and online, the headlines drive the engagement. And if you write a boring, factual headline, good luck getting people to see your ads. With a good old boring, factual headline, it's challenging. And a lot of it used to be like there was only a handful of places you could get your news. Now, and so if you wrote a boring, factual headline and you only had one local news source in your community, well then great, that works fine. But if you got 5 competing for an audience and you do that, you're probably out of business before long.
So let me take that one step further and give a specific example. I don't know if you guys have paid attention, but WGN, the station that used to carry the Cubs, I think they still do. And locally, by the way, the connection is that WGN covered the Scopes monkey trial and made it national news when that was happening in Dayton, Tennessee back in the day. WGN from Chicago has recently started a news service called News Nation, and they're bragging that it is unbiased news. And my wife and I have watched it a few times, and I'll tell you, it is kind of refreshing to sit there and watch some news that doesn't get under your collar because it's politically biased. The problem is their solution to being neutral is they basically ignore politics. They cover the forest fires in California, they cover the weather in New York, but they don't get very deep into the politics. They'll cover the bare facts. And I think part of the problem is you've either got to be boring or you've got to be biased. And if you even try to cover it in an interesting way, either a bias is going to come in there or someone's going to accuse you of being biased. So it's hard to be neutral anymore unless you're just going to be boring about it. So who out there besides WGN is actually trying to do a neutral news service? I haven't heard of anybody. Everybody is well, pretty much admitting that they have a bias, some worse than others.
We should launch boringassnews.com and see if anybody will go to.
Well, you know, it's really funny that you say that, though. I have found myself, I'm a huge consumer of podcasts, but I have found myself now, because I'm surrounded by so much politics, that I know now if I'm watching some podcasts that I used to like, and I still like them, and I'll use Joe Rogan as a great example. I love Joe Rogan, and I tune in to a lot of his podcasts. But even some of his podcasts with non-political guests would always go down a political road, which is fine every now and then. But I am surrounded by so much opinion that when I tune into some people like Joe Rogan and I want to hear him talk about something else, when they start spending that 8, 10, 12 minutes on politics, I'll just jump out and jump back in later. I'm getting to a point to where I am seeking out certain political conversations, or I'm just checking out of it completely because it's everywhere around me. And I get tired of it. And y'all both, we were talking about headlines. Locally, it's the same thing. I've got friends that work in the local media. I mean, I worked for a couple of the radio stations in different capacities, but they post headlines, and it's funny. When they post a headline that's pro-Trump, I can just you can just see the comments, bling, bling, they hate it. When it's against Trump, the other team jumps in. They hate it. They do it on purpose, and I know they do it on purpose.
Well, for example, I'll give you a couple of headlines. I actually went and grabbed some from local news sources here that I think are interesting. So I love this. And you read the article, and it's always like this, especially anything that has to do with COVID. Like, I don't know, we are mad for safety in this county, and we don't give a you know what for freedom anymore.
Can we call it COVIDiocy? I like that. I've heard that lately.
COVIDiocy.
It's COVIDiocy. The idiotic reaction to the COVID virus. COVIDiocy.
Yeah. So all Hamilton County school students to switch to 2-day schedule due to rising COVID-19 cases. You know, it used to be we needed beds, and then it was deaths, and now it's just like, who's got a contagious disease? Well, probably damn everybody, because it's contagious. And so when the flu comes around, who's got the flu? A lot of people. Who's got the stomach virus? A lot of people. Why? Because it's contagious and it's a virus. And not a single word in there about how it will affect single parents or 2-job working families. I mean, it is economically destructive, because we've built our entire culture around this government babysitting apparatus that can't teach our kids to read or write. We built our whole culture around it. So when you shut down the babysitting machine, then it causes massive economic.
Look at you start another podcast. Go ahead though. I like that. There's
that. There's another one. New Chattanooga Police Oversight Board could be on the 2021 ballot. And this is just like a Chicago-style unelected group of bureaucrats that are appointed by damn local nonprofits. I like nonprofits. I've worked in them. You want to talk about some folks that are next to the government, probably the most inefficient and don't have a whole lot of entrepreneurial zeal or efficacy to get out there and get moving on anything. Yes, I would love for those people to be determining how the police control crime in our county. That sounds like freaking fantastic news to me. None of that's in there.
I don't think you're being
shoppers.
cynical enough. They're talking about nonprofits who may actually be interested in defunding the police and have an extreme position, and they want them to somehow have this supervisory role and some official authority. I've had some conversations with our local state senator about that, and it scares me.
Well, some of our local state senators voted against school choice and for a whole bunch of other stuff, and they're not really as conservative as you might think.
At least on this one, he is.
That's good.
Not naming any names.
Yeah, even a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while. So many Chattanooga area shoppers and merchants are expecting a different Black Friday this year. Well, no crap. You make the shopping experience completely uncomfortable and aggravating, and then you pump fear into the market for 24/7. Down the road, look at these specialty shops that have clothes on them. Little bookstores, places that employ 2 or 3 people, 7 or 8 people, and it just keeps going on and on. Here's my favorite one. Okay, this is good. This is recent. Chattanooga looks to minority and women-owned business contracts in light of disparity study. It's basically like city really wants to use racism and sexual discrimination in its hiring practices because they can't find anybody that is the right color or sex that owns a contracting business. Because women don't want to get into the damn contracting business and deal with a bunch of jerk blue-collar men. They don't get into it. And 80-some-odd% of women are audiologists. I can't explain why people pick certain things, but they do. And so it's just it's not even in the article that it might be a bad idea to use racism and sexism to hire people. That's the very definition of racism and sexism. It's not even in there. They don't even address it. They don't mention it. And
well, so they would though if it was. I mean, they would mention it if it went the other direction.
Yeah.
And that's the
we got a
gaslighting.
brand new honky hiring policy here in Chattanooga. We think it's going to be great. It's wonderful. We're just going to hire a bunch of white men. That would not give a good positive headline.
Well, and here's the I won't push back, but I'll kind of give an example. That's the way it was for a long time, and we kind of overcame that. In other words, there was discrimination in the workplace, and over the last 40 years, we've done a lot of good to get past that. So I don't understand the going backwards part of this whole conversation on headlines or in news coverage. It's almost like we want to go backwards and create the same problems we just pushed kind of through and are still fighting. I don't understand that concept.
Well, showing up with your kid once he gets his act together and whipping his ass when you didn't do it 20 years ago. And what good does that do?
Don't give my dad any ideas. Don't give my dad ideas. He's still able to whip my ass. I don't like that. Eric, you got anything on that?
Yeah, a couple ideas. Number one, Brandon, we need to do this show again, and I think we need to follow some of those rabbit trails about the coronavirus and the COVIDiocy a little bit more thoroughly. I think that's worth a whole separate show because I've been following that stuff all year, and we can talk numbers, we can talk facts, we can talk figures, and we can just talk about where we are as a country. And I'm scared to death about how we've overreacted to the coronavirus. And I don't think after about 3 or 4, I'll just say this. When Mayor Andy Burke decided that we couldn't sit in our cars in a parking lot for Easter morning services parked 6 feet apart because people might get out of their cars, I learned then and became convinced it had nothing to do with the virus. It was about control. It was about a plan. It was about a way of controlling people. Because what we normally would do as Americans is we'd be told, here's the rules, here's the concerns. Now you guys go figure out still how to have church on Sunday morning and park 6 feet apart and don't get out of your car, whatever you wanted to do based on what we knew in April. But to simply say, no, we're not doing it, it became about control. And I've been following the rest of the year, and I'm absolutely convinced that, yeah, it's a real disease, and yeah, some people are getting sick, and yeah, some people are dying, but it's nowhere near as dangerous, and it is way overplayed, and the government is using the coronavirus to make changes in our society that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do, and it scares the living crap out of me. So we need to have that conversation.
Yeah. That's when I led the lockdown protest, and here's that when they would not let us go to church on Easter Sunday, I got a call from a couple of ladies that were organizing the protest, and it was not being done very well. And because if you've never done political events, there's a big long 50 some odd item checklist you need to go through. And it's hard to get conservatives out in a pandemic because conservatives don't protest to begin with. And to get them out in the pandemic when they're going to be ridiculed, and perfect example, local media covering something. I can tie this back in here. They wrote this big long article about how we were a bunch of grandma killing hicks because we went out there without our masks on, and that reporters were going to be in your community wearing their masks because they really cared, and these other dumbasses over here, well, all they want is their jobs and their freedom. I mean, who are they? Well, he didn't mention that the reporter didn't wear a mask when he came out and reported on everything. And he interviewed people right beside him that none of that was ever mentioned in the article because, they rode in on their white horses to solve all the problems. And that's the kind of biased stuff you see all the time. And people shouldn't have to protest to go to church. They shouldn't have to protest to keep their jobs. And we've had some major, Eric, our local leaders have failed so miserably during this epidemic at helping us retain our rights at the state level, at the local level, at the county level. I have never seen more cowardice from conservatives in my life than I have recently seen.
Well, and I'm going to bring this back into the headlines, and I know you got to leave in 5 minutes, Eric. I want you to get your last couple comments in, and Eric, you and I may stay on just for a few minutes to wrap it up in a different way.
Sure. How else are we going to talk about Brandon behind his back if we don't let him leave and keep talking?
He won't listen. We know that.
It's a small bag. I'm only about 5'5". It'll be easy.
No, well, but if we're going to go back to the headlines, because I want to keep this about the media as much as possible, because COVID is another conversation. Because I right now know a lot of people are sick with it. I mean, I know right now, there's people that have watched this that are sick with it, and 2 or 3 of them are struggling pretty good with it. So you got to be able to talk about COVID, and it doesn't come across as cold and insensitive because it is hurting people. I've got personal friends that have passed away. And so you've got to be able to talk about it and still talk about this, though. This is the headlines. If you're over here and you're having a protest or a riot, or your politician wins a big election, you can get together with or without mask in groups of hundreds to thousands, and that's okay. Doctors will sign off on it. The newspapers and headlines will run that it's okay because that's such a big issue. But don't have Thanksgiving. Don't have this rally. Newsom from California can go have a dinner with 50, 60 people and a high-end thing. That's okay. The governor of New York can do this, but you can't do that. I'm okay with having standards. I'm okay with us taking everything seriously. What baffles my brain is how the media blatantly is picking a side, and I've got friends that cannot see that. They don't see the hypocrisy of the media saying this is fine because it's about something we like, and this is not fine because it's not about something we don't like. I think it then minimizes the COVID virus. Like everything else, if everything else is racist, nothing's racist. If everything about COVID is going to be political, then it's hard for people to talk about it in a serious manner. Does that make sense?
It goes to the very core of what we're talking about, Clint, that these conversations we should be having about coronavirus, if we could have them out in the open, have them, yes, it's dangerous. Yes, some people gotten sick. I actually have a first cousin who has it so bad. He got it back in March that he's still having to have brain surgeries and follow-up treatment, and his wife got it and passed away. I'm not minimizing the fact that it doesn't kill some people, but our policy in response to it has been wrong. It has been absolutely wrong, and we have screwed up our country, and I think it is politically based, and we should have that conversation. But when it goes back to the media, here's my key point. Nothing has struck in my mind more to tell me that we have a real media problem and that we have something going on in our country in terms of the attitude of people is that big tech, the place where people get news, is not only covering the story on a one-sided basis, but if anybody even offers a different opinion, YouTube or Facebook or whoever it is taking down videos of doctors explaining why it's not true. Or the Great Barrington statement that explains what a better plan might be gets zero coverage because it doesn't go along with the narrative. When doctors who say, well, here's the science, get told by other doctors, yeah, you're probably right, but that's not, you need to get with the program and not publish your paper. There are doctors who have literally been told that. There's something going on that's not about the virus. And if our country doesn't stand up to recognize that, that kind of control is going on, we're in big trouble.
Well,
we are in big trouble.
And I'll give Brandon the last word here because he's got about a minute or two before he's got to leave. But it's not just about the COVID virus, Brandon. That scenario he just built of the political propaganda machine silencing things that disagree with them now in big tech. That's kind of why you started your news source, right?
It is, and we deliver all of our news by email and text message, and we build our database because you never know when a social media channel is going to shut you down, and depending on if the Democrats get in there and decide to censor even more, you're really going to have to, conservatives are going to have to really dig and work and hunt and go directly to sources in order to get their news. And I believe COVID is obviously serious. I buried one of my best friends, Matt Robbins, 50 years old, in Memphis, Tennessee. He came down the summer and spent the weekend with me, and we went out on the river and got to hold my new, then 1.5-year old girl, and he's gone. And I think about him all the time. My best friend Tommy, I was going to his house this weekend for Thanksgiving back home. He's got it. He's a frontline nurse. We've had members in the family that have had it and recovered that are 80 some odd years old with cancer, and they recovered. But some people don't make it. But when you've got a 99.9 some odd % survival rate with people under 70 that don't have comorbidities, people have to get on with their lives. And I'll close one thing here. It's happened a lot in the schools too, both privately and publicly. And I think the lesson we're teaching our children, because we weren't teaching them in the public schools to begin with, so what does it matter what they learn? But they were teaching them to be fearful and emotional and irrational. And adults are modeling the behavior for the children to see. And that is probably one of the scariest things about everything that has happened with this. And as the media covers it, it is all one-sided, as Eric mentioned. It's all about the safety. There's no concerns for economics. There's no concerns for the well-being, mentally or otherwise, for people. There's no talk of people that aren't going in to get cancer screenings or routine medical exams, postponed surgeries, depression, suicide, drug addiction. All that's just left off the table. It might get a brief mention, but in closing, they coined the term mass hysteria for a reason. You had things in history that have happened, like the dancing fever in the 1800s, Mars attacks. I mean, there's all kinds of crazy things that humans, because we're very tribal, will get caught up in. The issue is you have to use the side of your brain that allows you to see that that's happening, and if you cannot participate in it, and try to inform some of your friends of it as well. I mean, it's a big picture wrapped up in a lot of things, but the media has been complicit in leveling a lot of economic and emotional damage in our country as this pandemic has rolled out. And I hope they're called account for it one day.
Two things, and then I'm going to X you out, Eric. I want you to stay on with me just for a couple of minutes. But
we can talk about Brandon behind his back.
100%.
That's right.
But tell me,
nobody's talking about me. That's all I care.
I want you to tell people, one, how to, let's say they want to subscribe to their site. How do they find you, and how do they get your info on a consistent basis? And I'll say it again, it's not just they're using that plan, how they're doing with COVID, but they're using it about everything. They're using it for race. They're using it for one world government. They're using it for everything. And that's going to be their game plan moving forward, I think. They've got it down to a science now, how to yell louder than you and use that fear base. But tell people how to get a hold of your news source.
If you would like to get local conservative news, go to TennesseeConservativeNews.com. In case you wondered if we came from an angle, the title and name of our publication is TennesseeConservativeNews.com. So if you go there, you're like, oh, this all comes from a conservative perspective. It's because we're not a bunch of lying you-know-whats, like a lot of these other media outlets who are liberal, but just won't ever say it. So we'll tell you where we're coming from, and but we try to report both sides of things, but nobody ever looks at the other implications of government policy from a conservative perspective, at least here locally. So we're trying to do that because there's just a need for it. So conservativenews.com.
Thank you very much, Brandon.
Brandon, where do I put in an application to become a columnist?
You just did, bud. I think you just did.
I'm interested.
The pay is really terrible.
Hey,
the pay is terrible. I'll just let you know.
Listen, thank you to David Israel, John Ballinger, and Kelly Meeks Webster. I know them all. Thanks for tuning in. But he would make a great columnist. And I'm going to tell a story about Eric real quick. You can stay on and listen, or I can X you off. It's about a 2-minute story.
I will listen to this story. Then I'm going to run away and take my darling 8-year-old to an obstacle course training thing in North Georgia, where COVID doesn't live, which is very nice.
All right. So, and Eric has heard this story so many times, but we always have new listeners. And this is why I like Eric. I met Eric playing rugby for the Chattanooga Rugby Club back in the late 90s, early 2000s. But we became friends, and we're on this little road trip because I do not take road trips. And Eric kept saying, "You're going to fly." I don't fly unless I have to. So I took this other little road trip, but it was via car. And where did we go? Was it Tunica?
We went. You finally got out of the damn house.
Okay.
To Tunica with
Anyway,
me for one weekend of boys trip. I had a few beers. That was about the most.
So, but here's how smart Eric is, and this is why I love talking with Eric. And he is a history major and a history buff. We're in the van and we're driving. It's me, him, and 2 or 3 other guys that are like surgeons, doctors, and attorneys. And there's Clint that owns a marketing company. Hi, how are you doing? But we're driving, and he finds out my dad served in Vietnam. My dad served at the 82nd, 101st, and all this stuff. And he goes, "When's your dad there?" And I told him, he goes, "Was your dad ever in this?"
Say the Ia Drang Valley.
Okay, thank you. So I had my dad. My dad never doesn't text much at all. Back then, it was rare. So I text him, and I said, "We'll see if he'll respond." I said, "Hey, were you ever in?" And I had Eric spell it for me, and I sent it to my dad. And my dad just called because my dad ain't texting back at the time. I go, "Hey, what's up?" He goes, "Why'd you ask?" I said, "I'm with some. I'm just wanting to know." He goes, "Yeah, I was there, and it was hell on earth." "Who are you with?" And I go, "What do you mean?" He goes, "There's no way you spelled that right by yourself." He goes, "You have to be sitting with somebody smarter than you." I said, "Yeah, I'm sitting with Eric Buchanan." He goes, "Tell Eric hi," and hung up. I knew then that I was hanging out with smart people, and my dad's like, even my own father's like, "There's no way in hell you spelled that," because that was before we had Google. I knew how to use Google on the phone, so that was when I knew Eric was the real deal and was that smart. So I think he would make a great columnist for your news site.
Well, I'd love to have him. I appreciate y'all having me here today. I've enjoyed being part of the conversation. If I can ever help you, let me know.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brandon. We'll talk to you later, buddy. Have fun with your daughter. Hey, Eric, listen, we'll wrap this up too, but these are the kind of conversations, man, that I love having. And I'll be honest, I would love to get somebody from I think Braver Angels is a fictional place. I think you just bring it up so you can use them as an excuse to say certain things. If they're real, though, we ought to get one of your folks on with us.
That's a good point. We probably should do a show. Lynn Healy is the blue co-chair for the state of Tennessee. She's in Nashville. She's a former school teacher, former principal, I think. And we get along really well, and we've learned how to talk about stuff that in a way that allows us to communicate without having to have deep political discussions that get each other mad.
Yeah.
Learning how to trust each other and have a conversation, I think, is going to be crucial.
But don't you have to learn to trust that the other person's motive is not sinister? In other words, we're not having a conversation for you to be mean or prove me wrong. We're having a conversation for us to exchange ideas. If you don't trust that going into it, it's hard to have a real vulnerable conversation where you can say what's on your mind, right?
That's absolutely true. And that's something that I think is important for Americans to take on the attitude of again. That whether we are Democrats or Republicans, the vast majority of us are somewhere on the side of there's a solution to these problems, and we don't want it to be too unfair. We don't want one side or the other to be picking election winners without the chance to be a fair election. We don't want one side or the other control all the news. There are people who do, and those are the extremists. Those are not the everyday Americans. So how do we rebuild in American society the idea of basically a sense of trust, that we trust each other to come to these problems and conversations from a place of goodwill, that we're not mean people, that we're not the enemy, that Americans who disagree politically have a belief in their ideas that's a good belief, and we can go and talk to each other about our ideas and not be angry with each other and not be distrustful of each other. So starting with trust, I think, is number one. And then number two, something we need to work on is I'm getting this sort of from the idea of there's things that teams do. And one thing that a good team does is doesn't have a fear of conflict. If you think somebody else on your team is not performing well, or that you can help that person, or that you're willing to take advice, a team can work better if they don't have a fear of conflict, that they're willing to talk to each other. And I think one mistake that we have made as a country is the old idea that you don't talk about politics. I think instead what we need to learn how to do is there are times it's okay to talk about politics. What it's not okay to do is make the other guy, the other side of the conversation, into the bad guy. That somebody who disagrees with you is evil, is mean, is
unpatriotic. That's one that gets me.
Unpatriotic or totalitarian or
Hitler.
Yeah, I'm going to reserve those for a few people in Washington, D.C. who are sort of demonstrating that. But the vast majority of Americans are much more in the middle, or at least are willing to have a reasonable conversation. And that's what we need to get back to.
Well,
Learn
when
to
you
trust each other, not have a fear of conflict. And then the next level is having a commitment. And what's that commitment to? Commitment to basic American values, fair elections, free speech, that we all trust each other, that Americans want what is best for America. That
free
we want
markets.
what's best for people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's one thing we can talk about: free markets, or at least enough of a free market that it can function and not be destroyed by people going too far to the left. But there's people on the left who would say we need to have a social safety net and enough free market to support it.
Well, we've talked about this
yeah.
though, man. We've talked about how it is there's a difference between capitalism and crony capitalism, and I'm a big believer of capitalism, but we've kind of dove into crony capitalism a couple of conversations. And the other thing is, before you start calling people Hitler and racist and all these big things, you might want to go do some reading on what those things really look like in the past, because you're insulting the evil that they represent, and you're really assigning that to somebody who probably is nowhere near that, and in any other circumstance might be your friend.
I think that's a great point. And going back to the capitalism thing, I do want to, as we get close to being done here, I'm a big fan of Walter Williams, who passed away this week. And one of his great quotes, and I can't get it exactly off the top of my head, but it essentially says that if you look at the whole history of human beings for 100,000 years, and for at least the, say, 8,000 years of recorded history, the normal life of human beings is that a small minority of elite powerful people, mostly strongmen and kings and emperors and dictators, have controlled the lives of the rest of human beings. And throughout that history, there has been this tiny little window where Americans, to some extent Canadians, Western Europeans, in the last couple hundred years have lived in relative freedom, and much more freedom than the rest of mankind has lived throughout history. And the history of the economics of the world are a few strong men who by force take from other people and force them to all serve those few strong men, whether they're kings or emperors. What capitalism does is it allows people to provide for others by serving them. That I'm going to make money as a capitalist by serving others, not making them serve me. And that's one of the great things that we have proven in this country in the last 200 years, is that it works. And there's people out there right now trying to destroy that. And we have a problem that people have not been taught how important that is.
Man, I love it. Every time I get through these conversations with you, I just want to go, I'm going to go stand outside with my flag for a few minutes. Just wave it and see what happens. But all right, man, listen, let's wrap this one up and we'll be back for our normal. This was a special edition because we had Brandon Lewis, and I know he has the Tennessee Conservative News, and we'll be back Monday.
We can have him back again soon.
I've been asking to get y'all two together because I think you and him, with his platform and your Braver Angels and your contacts around the state and the country, I think that's a good combination for you two to maybe have some offline conversations. So there you go.
Absolutely.
Talk to you later, buddy.
Thanks, Clint. Good seeing you.
See y'all, everybody.